Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something major, a geopolitical situation that's honestly quite alarming. The escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. This isn't just another news cycle item. It feels like, a potential turning point. It could impact global alliances, oil stability, everything, really. Our roadmap for this is an article, World on the Brink, Israel and Iran Enter War, U.S. Drawn In, and it features commentary from Professor Glenn Deason at the University of Southeastern Norway. So our goal today is to, unpack this, get past the headlines and understand the deeper forces at play here.
Exactly. It's incredibly complex, and what we want to do for you is pull out the key insights from the source material, really focus on why this matters. And just to be clear, we're reporting impartially on the content here, laying out the ideas from the article itself, no spin added.
Okay, great. So let's dive right in. What's the core idea, the fundamental premise in the source about this emerging fight between Israel and Iran? What's the big picture?
Well, the central point isn't just, another conflict. It's more about how decades of U.S. actions in the Middle East, plus this really tangled web of alliances, have kind of paved the way for a direct confrontation, something we haven't quite seen before in this specific way.
A direct confrontation.
Yeah. And if you zoom out, the article puts this whole thing against the background of, history.
Yeah.
U.S. involvement, nuclear talks, regional militias, all that. But and this is crucial, it also brings up what Professor Deason calls Western military overstretch.
Overstretch, meaning?
Meaning resources like actual weapons and ammunition, but also political energy, are already stretched super thin. Think about Ukraine. And that severely limits Washington's choices now. It's a really key constraint.
Right. That definitely changes the usual script. So the force emphasizes Iran isn't just, another adversary. It says Iran is uniquely resilient. What makes them so strategically tough, maybe tougher than in past regional fights?
That's a fascinating part. Iran's strategic depth. It's not just about their army. First off, their geography. It's like a natural fortress. You've got mountains, dispersed facilities, stuff buried deep underground. It makes a conventional air attack really, really difficult to succeed with. It's strategically ideal for defense.
So the land itself is a defense mechanism. That's interesting. What else?
Definitely. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz. Huge factor.
The oil choke point.
Exactly. A huge chunk of the world's oil goes through there. If Iran decides to, or is able to, shut that down, well, you're looking at a potential global economic crisis, like serious meltdown territory.
Wow. Okay. Geography, Hormuz, anything else?
And third, their missiles. They apparently have thousands, many hidden underground. This means they could potentially keep hitting back for a long time in a dragged-out fight, a war of attrition.
A war of attrition. That sounds brutal and incredibly draining. So when people draw comparisons to, say, the Iraq War, the source mentions this. How accurate is that, really, given what you just laid out?
Yeah, it's a really important question the source tackles. Professor Deason notes that, unfortunately, some of the talk justifying an attack on Iran sounds a lot like the old WMD rhetoric about Iraq from the Bush era.
Right, I remember that.
But here's the critical difference. Iran is just much more formidable. It's got twice the people. It's 4 times bigger geographically. It has a unified military, these extensive proxy networks. It's a completely different beast. So any comparison that ignores those massive differences is, frankly, missing the point, according to the analysis.
Okay, so a very different situation. Now, before things got this bad, there was diplomacy, right?
Okay.
The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. What does the source material say about that whole chapter? Its role, why it failed?
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Right, the JCPOA. Under that deal, Iran did agree to some pretty intrusive inspections. The article suggests this showed they were, at least then, willing to avoid building nuclear weapons. But the big turning point was the Trump administration unilaterally pulling the U.S. out of that deal.
Okay, the U.S. pulled out. Did that lead to, a better deal or just escalation?
Escalation, pretty much. According to the source, the U.S. then piled on new demands, really tough ones, basically asking Iran to give up its entire defensive strategy and regional influence.
Like what?
Things like stop all missile development, cut all ties with groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, essentially demanding total capitulation. The effect, it just killed the diplomatic space, made Iran, deeply distrustful and feeling cornered. The article argues this pretty much set the stage for the military option becoming more likely. No off-ramps left.
That context is vital. Now, Professor Deason actually visited Iran. The source mentions this, gives him a unique viewpoint. Can you share a bit about that? What did he see, and how does it shape his take on the initial conflict?
Yeah, that's quite something. He mentions visiting nuclear sites, military spots, even broadcasting from a studio that later got bombed, so definitely a unique perspective. He met officials there, and also people like George Galloway, Alistair Crook, international observers. What he apparently gathered was that Iran knew a strike was possible, maybe even likely. But the timing, that was the surprise. It happened while negotiations were still technically ongoing.
A tactic to catch them off guard, maybe?
Seems likely, yeah. The analysis suggests the element of surprise was definitely part of the initial plan.
Okay, so we've covered Iran's defenses, the diplomatic breakdown. Let's pivot to Israel's initial strategy. What were they trying to achieve, and how did that play out according to the source?
Well, the goals described were very ambitious, aiming to take out Iran's top political and military leaders, using cyber attacks to paralyze air defenses, and then launching a massive shock and awe style attack.
Shock and awe meaning hit them so hard and fast they basically collapse, right? Aiming for regime change.
Exactly. Overwhelm them psychologically and militarily, break their will to fight, hoping the whole system crumbles quickly.
And did it work?
Initially, the source suggests some limited success. Reports of Iranian air defenses being down for maybe 8 hours. Some high-profile assassinations happened. Even journalists were targeted. But Iran apparently recovered relatively quickly. They started launching counterattacks. The big goal, destabilizing Iran enough for a collapse. That didn't happen. The shock didn't lead to awe, or at least not the desired collapse.
Okay, so the big knockout blow failed. What happened next then? What were the consequences for Israel, according to this analysis?
Well, what happened next is the situation shifted. It didn't end. It escalated into that prolonged conflict we talked about, basically a war of attrition.
Grinding fight.
Exactly. And now, the source argues, Israel is kind of trapped. They're burning through their expensive missile interceptors. They're already stretched thin with Gaza, Hezbollah on the northern border, the Houthis in Yemen. And connecting back to that earlier point, this is all happening while U.S. weapons stockpiles are low because of the aid going to Ukraine.
Right, the overstretch factor again.
Oh.
Which leads us straight to, well, probably the toughest part, the U.S. dilemma. The source mentions no good options. What does that mean?
Yeah, it paints a picture of the U.S. being in a real bind. A classic lose-lose, really. Option one, step in militarily to help Israel more directly. The risk, getting sucked into another long, costly quagmire in the Middle East. Another endless war.
Which nobody seems to want.
Exactly. Polls show American public opinion is strongly against another major war, very different from the post-9/11 mood. Option two, stay out or limit involvement. The risk there. Israel could potentially face collapse, leading to a huge power vacuum in the region, which could be even more chaotic and dangerous.
And the economic risks you mentioned.
Oh, huge. A wider conflict could absolutely tank global oil markets. Imagine gas prices soaring, inflation spiking. It could destabilize the whole global economy. So, yeah, no easy choices.
A grim picture indeed. The article also brings up President Trump, finding a kind of paradox in his position. What's the analysis there regarding his America First promises versus what's happening?
It's an interesting point Professor Deason makes. Trump, campaigned hard on being a peace president, getting out of foreign wars, America first. But his current rhetoric and some actions described in the source seem to align more with traditional neocon war policies when it comes to this specific conflict. Deason suggests Trump might have miscalculated, maybe assumed Israel could handle Iran on its own without needing major U.S. intervention.
And now?
Now he's in a tough spot. If he doesn't step up U.S. help significantly and Israel struggles or fails, he could be blamed. But if he does commit more U.S. forces, he gets dragged into exactly the kind of endless war he promised to avoid.
A real political tightrope.
Absolutely. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, politically speaking.
So, looking at this whole complex, dangerous situation, Professor Deason issues a pretty stark warning at the end. What's his final takeaway? His bottom line?
He basically calls the whole situation a potential blunder of historic proportions.
Strong words.
Very. His assessment is that Iran's ability to deter attacks and retaliate is still largely intact. Meanwhile, Israel's offensive can't be sustained long-term without a major U.S. escalation. And the biggest fear expressed is that this whole thing spirals. It could easily expand into a wider regional war, maybe even global, given all the interconnected risk soil, potential nuclear elements, the complex web of alliances. It's a warning about heading down a path with potentially no good exit.
Wow. We have certainly covered a lot of ground today, a real deep dive into Iran's strategic position, the failed diplomacy, this shift into a brutal war of attrition, and this incredibly difficult dilemma the U.S. is facing.
Yeah, it's clear from the source material this isn't a situation with simple solutions. It really lays out a landscape with potentially no clear off-ramp, no easy exit strategy in sight. The complexity is just immense.
So thinking about everything we've unpacked, the geography giving Iran an edge, the diplomatic doors slamming shut, the strain on military resources, those huge economic and political risks. What does this deep dive suggest to you and to you listen about where things might be heading, not just in the Middle East, but for international power dynamics, for how conflicts even happen in our interconnected world? Definitely something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.